Peru's cabinet of ministers, led by Aníbal Torres, received a vote of confidence from the Peruvian Congress on Wednesday. Russia ratified the entry into force of a new humanitarian truce in Ukraine to allow the evacuation of civilians from the capital Kyiv and other cities. In South Korea, polling stations closed with a high turnout and set a record of early voting for 77.1% of presidential elections. The citizens of that country are choosing their new president for the next 5 years. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Dio Martin, from the Telestart studios in Havana. We begin with the news. Peru's cabinet of ministers, led by Aníbal Torres, received a vote of confidence from the Peruvian Congress on Wednesday. After more than 9 hours of session, the Ministerial cabinet was finally approved with 64 votes in favor, 58 against, and 2 abstentions. The head of the cabinet explained to the parliamentarians the work being carried out by the government of President Pedro Castillo after 7 months since he took office. Finally, he called for a political agreement as a way to achieve the democratic governance that the people of Peru need. Among the issues discussed by Torres were the paralyzed works, healthcare, as well as public services. In Chile, the exiting government of Sebastián Piñera extended the state of emergency in the southern macrozone. The Chilean Senate extended for 15 days the state of emergency that has been enforced in the southern macrozone since last October. This new deployment of militarization will be extended until the 26th of this month. The measure affects Mapuche territories in the provinces of Biobío, Arauco, Cautín, and Malleco, and for this reason the Mapuche community has denounced police harassment and repression on several occasions. The measure comes into force during the first 15 days of the government of President-elect Gabriel Boric, who will have the power to annul it. Interior Minister Rodrigo Delgado said that this is the last declaration under Sebastián Piñera's government, and it will be up to Boric and the future Undersecretary of the Interior to decide whether to maintain the condition. Colombians voting abroad in the legislative elections is running smoothly. The announcement was made Tuesday by the nation's foreign minister, who also said that at least 6,000 Colombians have already voted at the 250 polling stations spread along 67 countries set up by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Registry. Another 106 stations will be added by next Sunday. Polls abroad opened on March 6th and will close March 13th, the day scheduled for the country's legislative voting and for the coalition's consultations for the upcoming presidential elections. Women in Latin America, sexual violence and demand emancipation and equality. Protesters worldwide also took to the streets for International Women's Day on Tuesday, with demonstrators clashing with police in Turkey and many rallies urging solidarity with women against feminicide. Also in Europe, in Madrid, some 30,000 protesters turned the city center into a sea of purple. A festive atmosphere, however, was marked by rhythmic drumming and chanting as a crowd waved banners against gender violence. Thousands more rallied in Barcelona, another city in Spain, while in Athens and Greece, around 2,000 people marched through the streets.
At this moment in Colombia, we are trying to redefine the struggle of March 8th, because it is not a celebration of Women's Day, nor is it to give roses or anything like that, but to commemorate women and their struggle for gender equality. We started the electoral year shouting out Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro never again. We don't just want him out, but we never want him again, precisely because he represents everything that is bad for us women: conservatism, fascism, and machismo embedded in everything he does. The Bolsonaro government made speeches like, "I wouldn't rape you because you are ugly. Women should earn less." These are speeches that Bolsonaro has been echoing throughout his government. So today we are fighting for a dignified life, for our life. That is why we are in the street today.
Within the framework of International Women's Day, this March 8th, the Sinaloa Congress decriminalized abortion for up to 13 weeks of gestation. With 28 votes in favor, 2 against, and 9 abstentions, the Sinaloa Congress approved in general the initiative that modifies the penal code, the health law, the family code, the civil code, and the law on women's access to a life free of violence. This way, Sinaloa became the 7th state to decriminalize the termination of pregnancy. The initiative stated that the woman or pregnant person who terminates the pregnancy process after the 13th week will commit the crime of interruption of pregnancy. Therefore, a reprimand of up to 1 to 3 months of comprehensive measures will be imposed. It was also noted that those who help terminate the pregnancy after the established period of time will receive 20 to 50 days of social work, or from 200 to 600 days of fine. Now, we have, within the framework of International Women's Day, this March 8th, the Brazilian women took to the streets to protest against Bolsonaro's genocidal policies, rejected sexual violence, and demanded gender equality. Our correspondent Brian Meyer has the details.
March 8th, tens of thousands of women took to the streets in dozens of cities across Brazil to commemorate International Women's Day, which was first declared a holiday by the Russian Soviet Republic in 1917 and declared an international holiday by the UN in 1977.
The main reason we are occupying the streets all over Brazil on this March 8th is to denounce the negative effects of agribusiness in our life, and most of all, the damage that President Bolsonaro has caused to Brazil, which directly affects the lives of women.
In Recife, the women from the social movements and labor unions which organized the march highlighted the erosion of rights and increase in femicide caused by the last 3 years of Jair Bolsonaro's disastrous far-right government.
The Pernambuco Education Workers Union is on the street protesting Bolsonarism, this genocidal government that has caused the death of thousands of women. It is an anti-science, anti-education and anti-women government.
On March 8th, the streets of cities across Brazil echoed with shouts of "Out with Bolsonaro." Brian Mir, Telesur, Recife.
In El Salvador, residents and human rights organizations have denounced the threat of destruction of the monuments in memory of the victims of the El Mozote massacre. After the announcement of the start of construction work by the municipality, the Association for the Promotion of Human Rights and Relatives of the El Mozote massacre victims fear that a place of such importance for the community will be definitively affected. At a press conference, they warned about the possibility of eliminating sites that remember the massacre that occurred in 1981 during the armed conflict.
Images of networks or images of virtual designs have circulated, according to which it seems that the monuments will be altered and that communities are not being informed of what they are going to do. They deny that they are going to touch them, but the designs that they have made public says the opposite. For example, it seems that they are destroying the concrete mural, the mural of light next to the church that represents the murdered children and their resurrection towards the light. And it seems that the mural with the image of a family that has accompanied the community commemorations since 1991 and where Rufina Maya is buried, the great defender of truth, survivor of El Mozote and dozens of children buried there, and adults from different villages, is going to be removed. In other words, it is a site that represents the identity of pain, reconstruction, and a struggle for justice for the victim.
We're going to take a short break now. Please join us again after this. Hi, and welcome back to From the South. Russia ratified the entry into force of a new humanitarian truce in Ukraine to allow the evacuation of civilians from the capital Kyiv and other cities. Today, the Russian Interdepartmental Coordinating Body for the Humanitarian Response in Ukraine announced that the ceasefire started this Wednesday at 7 a.m. Ukrainian time is aimed at guaranteeing security and facilitating the work of humanitarian corridors. During this ceasefire, Moscow has proposed to establish continuous communications between the Russian and Ukrainian sides to exchange information on the process. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk confirmed the setup of new humanitarian corridors in several cities to evacuate the civilian population. The Russian Defense Ministry posted a video of humanitarian aid being distributed among the residents of a village outside of the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. The ministry stated that Russian servicemen delivered food supplies and articles of daily necessity to the Izum district of Kharkiv region to provide the locals with humanitarian aid. The aid was delivered to the areas controlled by the Russian Federation Armed Forces and liberated from the presence of Ukrainian nationalists. Meanwhile, Ukrainian head of state Volodymyr Zelensky said hundreds of people were evacuated from the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy through a humanitarian corridor.
Today we managed to organize a humanitarian corridor from the city of Sumy to Poltava. Hundreds of people were saved. The humanitarian cargo was delivered. But that's only 1% of what needs to be done, of what people blocked Ukrainian expect. We're ready. Our cargo is ready. Our transport is ready. But the savages, they're not ready. They fire at evacuation route.
And on Wednesday, Russian authorities denounced the economic war imposed by the United States. Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov warned that the United States is waging an economic war against Russia. Peskov said that the Russian government is implementing systemic measures to stabilize the country's economic situation. These statements followed the White House announcement of an embargo on oil and gas imports from Russia, the latest sanction imposed by Washington against Moscow because of the crisis in Ukraine. Russia underscores that Moscow's troops are not working to topple the Ukrainian government.
The goals of the special military operation are the protection of the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, the elimination of the military threat against Russia, which comes from Ukrainian territory due to NATO countries conquering it and pumping weapons into it. Its aim is not to occupy Ukraine, or the destruction of its statehood, or the overthrow of the government. It is not directed against the civilian population.
Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova says that negotiations with Kyiv to resolve the Ukraine conflict are making headway.
In parallel with the special military operation, negotiations are also being held with the Ukrainian side in order to end the senseless bloodshed and resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine as soon as possible. On March 7, as you already know, the third round of those talks was held in Belarus, during which political, military and humanitarian issues were discussed. Some progress has been made.
And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov plans to meet his Ukrainian counterpart Dmitry Kuleba in the Turkish city of Antalya, as was confirmed by Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova. The Russian delegation headed by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is indeed scheduled to leave for Turkey this Wednesday, as Zakharova told Radio Sputnik. The statement comes after Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu announced last Friday that Ankara proposed to organize a meeting of the Russian and Ukrainian foreign ministers within the framework of the diplomatic forum in Antalya, with the consent of both sides. The talks come at a time when 5 humanitarian corridors have been activated so that civilians from Kyiv, Kharkov, Chernigov, Sumy and Mariupol can be evacuated to the territory of Russia or to other localities of Ukraine as part of the bi-party dialogues. Russia's military operation in Ukraine helped hinder a large-scale offensive by Ukrainian troops in the Donbass region planned for March of this year, according to Russian Defense Ministry spokesman.
A special military operation of the Russian armed forces, conducted since February 24, preempted and thwarted a large-scale offensive by strike groups of Ukrainian troops of the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, which are not controlled by Kyiv, planned for March of this year. Thus, only one question remains unclear so far: how deeply the U.S. leadership and its NATO allies were involved in the planning and preparation of the operation to storm the Donbass by the Ukrainian inner service grouping of troops in early March, all those who care so much about peace in Ukraine today.
Russian Defense Ministry spokesman said that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization military advisors had been training Ukrainian troops since 2016 to launch a large-scale offensive against Donetsk and Luhansk.
I would like to emphasize that since 2016, this formation of the Ukrainian airborne assault troops has been trained by American and British instructors under NATO standards training programs in Lvov.
Austria suspended a law making COVID-19 vaccinations mandatory for all adults, the government said on Wednesday, just a month after the legislation took effect in a European Union first. The Alpine nation of 9 million people was among few countries in the world to make jabs against the coronavirus compulsory for all adults. The law took effect in February and called for fines of up to more than $3,000 from mid-March for those who do not comply. But according to Minister for the European Union and the Constitution, Caroline Edstadler, the law's encroachment of fundamental rights could no longer be justified by the danger posed by the pandemic. Calls to review the law became increasingly loud, especially as Austria has dropped almost all coronavirus restrictions in recent weeks. As of Tuesday, Austria has recorded almost 3 million coronavirus cases and more than 15,000 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic in 2020.
Why? Because there are currently many arguments that this encroachment of fundamental rights is not justified, that at the moment we see no need to actually implement this compulsory vaccination due to the Omicron variant that we are predominantly experiencing here, and that the Commission is also formulating.
We have more news coming up after a final short break. Please stay with us. Hi, and welcome back. In South Korea, polling stations closed with a high turnout, including a record of early voting of 77.1%. The country is electing a new president for the next 5 years. All 14,464 polling stations across the country have already closed, according to the National Election Commission. Some 44 million South Koreans were called to the polls. However, around 16 million had already cast their ballots much earlier. According to the polls, the two main contenders are the liberal Lee Jae-myung and the conservative Yoon Suk-yeol. Both had ended up with a 1 percentage difference of the results to succeed President Moon Jae-in.
It's a neck-and-neck election, so we really can't guess who will win. I have no idea who will become the next president. I had a lot of difficulty deciding who to vote for. It was difficult because all the candidates seem pretty much the same on the media and elsewhere. The coronavirus pandemic is severe right now, with more than 3,000 daily cases. So I thought it would be better to vote early when it is relatively less busy.
China said it welcomes United Nations rights chief's upcoming visit to Xinjiang. According to a spokesperson from the Foreign Ministry, both sides are having negotiations on the specific arrangements for the visit.
China's position on the relevant visit is consistent and clear. The aim of the visit is to promote exchange and cooperation between both sides. We've always opposed individual countries making use of this matter for political maneuvering. China has repeatedly stressed that the so-called forced labor in Xinjiang is a huge lie concocted by anti-China forces and has no factual basis. We hope relevant parties can distinguish right from wrong and not be deceived by lies so as to avoid unnecessary losses to their own interests.
On Wednesday, a Palestinian young man was killed after being repeatedly shot at by Israeli forces in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian adolescent Yemen Efezifal was killed in the city of Nablus by Israeli troops who not only fired at him but prevented an ambulance from reaching the young man as he lay on the ground bleeding. The Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement Hamas had condemned this incident and labeled it as a war crime, saying the occupying forces are behaving like terrorists, and they vowed to continue their fight against the occupation regime. Gunmen have killed 19 security personnel, including 13 soldiers, in an assault in the northwest Nigerian state of Kebbi. The battle erupted in Kanya, a village in Dankawasagu district, just a day after dozens of members of a self-defense militia were killed in the same area. As security personnel confirmed, the death toll stands at 19, including 13 soldiers, 5 policemen, and 1 vigilante. 8 other security personnel, including 4 soldiers, were hospitalized with injuries. Also, at least 57 vigilantes were killed in nearby Sakaba on Monday in an ambush by heavily armed criminal gangs known locally as bandits. Northwest and central Nigeria have been terrorized for years by criminal gangs who raid villages, killing and abducting residents for ransom after looting and burning their homes. Tunisian President Kais Saied declared war Wednesday on food speculators amid a shortage of products such as wheat and semolina, key staples in a country already mired in a political and economic crisis. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has threatened supplies of basic food supplies, particularly wheat, which many Arab countries import from the 2 Eastern European nations. Saied announced that he was launching a relentless war on speculators and criminals, as he called it, accusing them of seeking to strike at social peace and security. Tunisia remains embroiled in economic and political crisis 8 months after Saied seized extraordinary powers. Russia's invasion of Ukraine poses a threat to food supplies in Tunisia, which imports about half its wheat from Ukraine and is dependent on foreign countries for much of its food supplies.
I want it to be a relentless war against these criminal speculators, with the framework of the law, of course, and we will handle it within the law. And there will be a decree connected to the issue of hunger, so that it becomes an issue of distribution within the framework of the law.
A national emergency was declared on Wednesday in Australia after 22 people died in floods along the east coast. Prime Minister Scott Morrison made the announcement during a visit to Lismore in New South Wales, where 4 people lost their lives, adding the floods are a major catastrophe of national proportions. Morrison said the move will ensure all emergency powers are available and that the government can cut through any red tape they might face in delivering services and support on the ground. But many victims are angry that authorities did not come to their aid earlier, with some residents needing to be rescued from flooded homes by neighbors. Heavy rains have created the current emergency in New South Wales and Queensland states, where some of the flooded communities were battling fires 2 years ago.
The National State of Emergency Declaration, which was established after the Black Summer bushfires and the Royal Commission that was held, I announced my intention to recommend to the Governor-General a National Emergency Declaration covering the severe weather and flooding events across both New South Wales and Queensland to ensure all our emergency powers are available and that we cut through any red tape that might be faced. That's the principal purpose of that declaration.
The shipwrecks of Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton's HMS Endurance has been found more than a century after its sinking. The legendary ship was discovered last Saturday in the Weddell Sea off the coast of Antarctica at a depth of 9,842 feet, or approximately 3,000 meters, a few miles from where it was crushed by pack ice in 1915. The HMS Endurance was meant to make the first land crossing of Antarctica as a part of Shackleton's Imperial Transantarctic expedition between 1914 and 1917. It was found almost intact and in good conditions, coincidentally on the 100th anniversary of Ernest Shackleton's death. Now we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at Tell Us Our English. You can also join us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Diego Martin. Thanks for watching.